Hello. I'm experimenting with new technology now. I'm currently doing a Facebook Live through a software program called Zoom. So hopefully it's working. I'm going to see if I can can see comments. Oh yeah, this works. This is amazing. Incredible. Uh, there's a reason why I wanted to do this little Facebook Live. As many of you know, we're in the middle of Atheism for Lent at the moment, and some of you are hopefully doing that. I just wanted to make a little comment about some of the material that we're doing. At the moment, I think today's reading is Epicurus. Epicurus, Greek philosopher, who founded, the school that kind of explores how to lead a happy life through kind of moderation, through friendship, through avoiding pain, and through embracing good food and good wine. So it's this, interesting kind of early self-help type of philosophy. And I started off this week of the Atheism for Lent with a reading from him, where he basically puts an argument out about why he thinks God couldn't exist. It's a very simple argument, and by simple, I don't mean that in a bad way. I simply mean that it's the kind of argument that in some way all of us have probably thought of, especially whenever we're children. Epicurus just put it in a very succinct form. He basically said there are three statements that can't fit together. They are: there is evil in the world, God is good, and God is all powerful. Oh, and by the way, I can start to see your comments now, so thank you. I'm seeing Heather Lynn saying, cool background. Yes, this is actually some graffiti that's in the room I'm staying in at the moment. It's very cool. People from Australia, America, and New Zealand. It's all very exciting. Thank you for joining me. So yeah, Epicurus says these three statements, one of them can be true, and two of them can be true, but all three of them can't be true. And I say, there is evil, there is an all-good God and an all-powerful God. And he says this because he says, well, let's take the idea that there is evil, and we say that's true. Well, then we can have an all-good God, but not an all-powerful God, because if there's unnecessary suffering in the world, then that rules that out. Or we could have evil, unnecessary suffering, and we could have an all-powerful God, but then that God couldn't be all good, because otherwise that God would do something about it. Or we could have an all-good God and an all-powerful God, but then there would be no suffering, no unnecessary pain, no destruction, no wanton plagues and famines and whatnot. Now, this is one of the earliest arguments against the existence of God. I put it in because the first official week, the first kind of like week where we delve into Atheism for Lent, I wanted us to look at the basic arguments that people have made, primarily in analytic philosophy, that have questioned this idea of God as a being out there who's all powerful and all good, all loving, looking after us. But interestingly, this argument doesn't sit well with some of us. It doesn't sit well with me, for example. And I thought I would just give a little brief reflection about why I think that might be, at least from my perspective. And I think it's because it is abstract. I think one of the struggles with reading this without really necessarily consciously knowing this is there's something abstract about the argument. Now, by abstract, I mean it in the philosophical sense, which is very different from the popular sense. I've talked about this before, I think. Basically, we think that concrete means what we can see. You know, you look at something concrete, you isolate it from its environment, you look at it, you go, there's a concrete thing, right, that's going on. You look at the news and you see a war, you see some things that are happening in politics, and you go, right, that's concrete. I'm seeing the violence, I can understand it, right? And the abstract is kind of the intellectual life, is kind of connecting this with other things that are going on and kind of like beyond what you can see and what you can read. In a sense, Judge Dredd is the ultimate in concrete, right? So Judge Dredd is this person who, judges and executes immediately. If you break the law, Judge Dredd is there. He pronounces judgment on you. Sorry, my phone was ringing. He pronounces judgment on you, and then, you get thrown in prison or you get killed. The idea is that it's concrete because it doesn't take into consideration anything else that's going on. It's just, there's a criminal, they did something, and they need to be punished. But actually, from the perspective of Hegel, it's the other way around. Judge Dredd is the ultimate in abstraction. What Judge Dredd does is he abstracts the criminal from their economic background, from their educational background, from the violence that's been done to them, the society that they're part of. He takes them out of all of that world that they're immersed in, right? And judges them purely on what they've done. And from a philosophical perspective, that is abstraction, because the truth of an event has to take into consideration its historical and social environment. If it doesn't do that, then it's actually abstract. So, for example, a lot of the critiques of Donald Trump that you see online could technically be described as abstract if they simply take Donald Trump out of the social and historical context out of which he arose, the kind of the petri dish out of which kind of he arose, those policies arose, then that's a form of abstraction. Or if you see a police officer, who engages in some sort of illegal activity, and we go, oh, they're a rotten apple, right? We abstract them from the structural system that they're in and kind of judge them as an individual. Now, we can do that. That's actually the scientific approach to life, is to, look at something, to pull it apart, to look at its constitutive bits, and that's totally fine. But in continental philosophy, there is this idea of what's called historical materialism. And that is where you take into consideration the history of what is in front of you, and you try to understand what's going on in, say, a war that you're watching on the news. You try to understand the political and the sociological and the religious background and environment that is feeding this. And that, in philosophical terms, is concretizing. Whereas, as I say, on a popular level, we think that's abstraction. So anyway, from that perspective, Epicurus' argument can seem abstract for a simple reason. The word God is a word that describes a living concept, a living idea that is used in living communities in good and bad ways. But when you take that word and you kind of reduce it to some kind of very basic logical argument, something is lost, but it's always hard to put your finger on. Why is it that it feels wrong? Because the argument's actually quite strong. It's quite, it's an argument worth having and worth debating. And, it's an important argument in the history of philosophy. But the thing that we often can't put our finger on is the idea that, hold on a second, are we not abstracting this word God from the very complex and deep and interesting communities that use this word in all manner of problematic and also liberating ways? I think that anyway is part of the reason why it might sit difficult this day 6 of Atheism for Lent. But the reason why I included it in this week is because I put it beside, I kind of paired it with a Francis Bacon painting of Pope Innocent, and also an excerpt from a comic book called True Faith. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to actually concretize the argument. In other words, see that this argument actually has real flesh and blood behind it. It's not just some abstract person sitting there making a logical argument, but for many people, real suffering and real evil is part of our lives, our everyday lives. Like, all of us have been touched by suffering. All of us have been burnt by that black sun. And some of us, live in deep suffering and deep trauma, and to do with our family lives, to do with the country that we live in, the political environment that we're within. And so what I hope is that this week, as you see this argument of Epicurus beside this incredible painting by Francis Bacon, and as you read True Faith, which is a comic book that really captures, I think, in a very visceral sense, someone's anger at the universe, a legitimate anger and frustration, the argument won't sit so badly. And so if you're doing atheism for Lent, I recommend you sit with this argument of Epicurus and you kind of allow it to do its work and kind of see it more than just some sort of abstract argument. This is my, by the way, same concern with analytic philosophy when it comes to Pascal. Pascal had an argument called the wager, Pascal's wager, where he basically says, if you have to bet, and he says you have to bet on whether there's a God or not, he says the wise person will bet that there is a God and try to live accordingly. So that's kind of, Pascal's wager. But when I started studying philosophy, I heard that in abstraction, taken out of the rest of Pascal's work, because I started in analytic philosophy, actually. So I was doing analytic philosophy. We analyzed the argument, we pulled it apart, we critiqued it. And it was only later that I read Pensée, and I realized that this argument is part of something much richer and wider. And actually, we've completely misunderstood what Pascal is trying to say when we take that argument out of its context and then just dissect it like a biologist dissecting an insect. So in the same way that Blaise Pascal, I think, needs to be read within the context of his wider work and his wider interest, he wasn't trying to make some cold, dispassionate argument for belief in God. He was partly trying to get people to, enter into the experience of religious life. He was trying to encourage people to go, why don't you try to pray and try to engage in communion and try to, give alms and all of the various things that are part of the religious life, experience it from within and see what opens up. And one of his ways of doing that was by saying, listen, come on, give it a try. Think of it as a bet. I'm daring you to give that a go. And as soon as you start to read it in that wider context, I think that it becomes much richer. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it or not. It just means, okay, I see there's a richer understanding than this kind of analytic approach. That's what I think they do in continental philosophy. And I actually moved from analytic philosophy into continental philosophy, partly for that very reason. Okay, so I'll just go quickly see if you've got any questions or thoughts on that. Feel free to agree or disagree. Let's see. Oh yeah, someone said, I just saw a nice definition of abstract there. Oh no, I've lost it. Somebody said something like the abstract is that which is cut off from the real, which I guess what you're saying is, think of the abstract as what's cut off from its environment. What we put, it's like trying to understand what life is by, killing something and dissecting it. This is actually, the basic notion in I say what's called historical materialism, which is the idea that, to understand the current in economic and political environment, we need to understand what it arose out of, what feeds it, what gives it oxygen, what gives it life, and not like pull it out of that context and look at it in isolation. Let's see. Oh, Mark McConnell saying, do I know about God on Trial film on the BBC? You know what? I've seen that and it's brilliant. And I should have included it in the Atheism for Lent, and I didn't. So that's great. I might actually include it because I've still got time. We're only 6 days in. Or I may just put it as extra material or use it for next year. But thanks for reminding me of that. God on Trial is very good. Also, Channel 4 did an incredible one-part documentary on dramatization of the Grand Inquisitor from Dostoevsky, and it's really impossible to get, but it was very, very good as well. In fact, the BBC also did a 3-part series once about the second coming of Christ, where he comes down to the world, lives and dies, basically, commits suicide in a sense, and the idea being that he comes down to earth to die so that people could live without him, and the irony being that that's living without him is living true to what he wants, in other words, living with him. Again, I've never been able to track it down, so if anybody can find any of those things, you're incredibly impressive. Let's see. Oh yeah, Aaron says God does not liberate anyone. Yeah, I mean that, Aaron. Yeah, that's part of why I want to do deism for Lent, is because of the difficulty with that word, and it can be like deeply problematic, and I want to kind of explore that. So yeah, it's a dangerous word and concept. If I was having a drink with you, I would be very interested in finding out more about what that means for you, but you're probably thousands of miles away, so there you go. And then, Jennifer asks, okay, when is reduction useful and why, and when not? Okay, I'll use that as the last question, and I'll let you go. Yeah, it's a good question, because the point is, it's incredibly important. Like, the scientific method is pretty much a method that abstracts, that takes something out of its context and analyzes it. And because of that, we get incredible inventions, incredible stuff comes out of that. So there is a really vital place for doing that kind of work. But also the dialectic approach of continental philosophy is the one that's less known. That's the approach which says, well, it's a Gestalt approach. It's an approach that says you cannot really understand an organism, a person, without understanding their relationships with other people, their dynamic with their father and their mother and their children and all of that. And so, the hard and fast rule of, like physics, chemistry, biology, these are all disciplines that work with abstraction and formal logic and mathematics. But then, and this is I think one of the ways to define the difference between continental philosophy and analytic philosophy. Analytic philosophy is more in line with physics, biology, chemistry. It really values formal logic and abstraction and does great things with that. The problem, I think, that it is not useful when you're coming to understand human subjectivity, political structures, religious communities, and society. Whenever you're dealing with those things, I think that dialectics and historical materialism is important, which basically is understanding the individual and the community in relation to the environment itself. So yeah, I would never want to say, like, sometimes you hear someone saying, oh, I'm like, it's all about abstraction. It's all about, taking things out, analyzing, and that, like, logical positivism. It's like, that's the way the path to truth. And then on the other side, you get people who are like, think that science has given us nothing but pain, and it's given us nothing of real value. Yes, we can drive further, and yes, we can talk to people on the other side of the world with phones, but it's completely made life one-dimensional. And there might be truth to both of those, but I think that if it's a question of the abstract is useful for creating technologies, and maybe this other approach that I'm talking about is helpful for understanding what makes life worth living, what makes life valuable, how do we understand what it means to be human, then I think the phenomenological or the latter approach is probably better. Anyway, any other final thoughts before I cut you off? Or I say goodbye? I don't think so. How do you find the new technology? Is it working? Do I sound okay? Hopefully I'm using a better camera. I've got a better microphone. So I'm hoping that I can do Facebook Lives in this way, and it'll just be a bit more professional. So let me know if you think it's better than me just using my iPhone. Okay, take care of yourselves. I really appreciate you being part of this journey. If you're doing Atheism for Lent, if you're not, I really appreciate you clicking in and listening to my Facebook Lives. If you're in LA on St. Patrick's, the night before St. Patrick's, I'm doing Pints and Parables. What better way to celebrate St. Patrick's than with an Irish guy telling sad parables about depressed furry animals over a drink. So come and join me for that. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.